So this is going to be perhaps a perverse lecture, a short lecture on long durations. I want to talk about the question of time as a function of the relationship between real experiential time, lived time, if you will, and narrative filmic time, or theater time for that matter, the time of storytelling, the time in which you understand many days or weeks or months or years to go by, but the time you're literally sitting in your seat is much shorter than that. As we saw from the examples of early cinema in the last lecture, early cinema inhabited both worlds simultaneously. On the one hand, the fascination of watching the Lumiere brothers, The Arrival of a Train, is the fascination of inhabiting imaginatively the same time as the train rushing towards you. That's what gives it sense of realism, the kind of scary feeling of that huge locomotive rushing in your direction, is because you are inhabiting the same sort of temporal universe, if you will. On the other hand, when we watch something like Méliès' Voyage to the Moon, what we are watching is early cinema inventing for itself the narrative codes of editing, of sequential storytelling, by which a story that perhaps took several days or months, we really don't know how long it took those guys to get to the moon, is compressed into a very short film, and yet we still believably inhabit that temporal realm. Of course, the time of narrative cinema becomes the dominant time of commercial filmmaking. It's the time that structures all of our experience of the movies, our expectation that any story can be told in somewhere between 86 and 126 minutes or so, with certain notable exceptions. Artists, in turn, begin to really question that conceit, that fiction, that artifice of narrative time by forcing us back against the experience of real time as a way of making film into literally a thing before our eyes again, not an illusion to be passed through as an access point to another world, but the real fact of projected images proceeding sequentially before your eyes for a specific amount of time. And perhaps the most notorious examples of this are Andy Warhol's early films. In 1963, he does a film called Sleep, which is literally a film of watching several hours of one of his friends sleeping in bed. And so it's a film that takes 5 hours and 20 minutes to watch. It took literally that long to make. And you end up with no real narrative experience at all. Time passes. And you understand that when somebody goes to bed in a film, this is how long it takes them to wake up. And that pushes you back against the, the sort of literal temporality of film as a form, as a medium. Warhol follows Sleep with the film Empire from 1964. And this film was made all in one night, on the night of July 25th, 26th. Commences at 8:06 p.m. in the evening and goes to 2:42 a.m. in the morning. The interesting thing about this film is that it was shot at 24 frames per second, but it's projected at 18 frames per second, so that even though only about 6 hours and 36 minutes of film were made, the experience of the film when screened is about 8 hours and 5 minutes long. Now, why is that interesting? Because on the one hand, we're making an argument about a kind of forcing a viewer back against the experience of real time, the monotony of real time, the monotony of watching a building as a static object pass through the experience of nightfall and evening. But on the other hand, because of the question of variable projection speed, that duration is actually artificial time. It's slowed down in the viewer's experience to make it in some ways even more excruciating. Now, I'm not sure how many people really have sat through Andy Warhol's Empire from start till finish. One can certainly get a sense of it from a little bit, but that's not the same of what perhaps might be said to be the most extreme and interesting recent response to the notion of cinema as timekeeping and the notion of cinema that exists in real time. I would say that that would be Christian Marclay's The Clock from 2010. This is an installation-based film work that's been shown to great acclaim certainly around the country, if not around the world. And we have stills from it because I will say that Marclay's representatives were very gracious in giving us some images to look at as I attempt to explain this film, but they are also very vehement that the film can only be experienced in the installation space because it is a 24-hour film and it needs to be experienced in the scope of its own exhibition and the real time that it proposes. It's a film in which Marclay, with a whole host of assistants, scavenged the cinematic archive to find instances where a clock or other kind of timepiece appears, and then found one example for each moment in time within a 24-hour period. So effectively, it's a montage of film clips that keep time continuously, even as you jump from one film to another. So the experience of watching the clock is the experience of kind of really inhabiting a world where time is ticking away second by second, minute by minute, even as you jump imaginatively and impossibly from one filmic context and location to another and another and another. That sense of the relationship between the continuousness of time and the discontinuousness of the film clips both heightens and frustrates the expectations of narrative that we might bring towards film. Rather than having a storytelling event, Christian Marclay's Clock poses for us the experience of a kind of temporal event in real time. And I haven't been there when you reach midnight in the clock, but I'm told that it's sort of an extra special culminating experience when you have the opportunity to view this work. I want to set up a kind of dialogue between these works in which artists interrogate both the fact and the fiction of cinematic time to another set of works in which artists call our attention back to the duration of the making of the work, and in fact conceive of a project as explicitly time-based and explicitly a record of time passing. One of the most interesting examples in this regard is an early work by the California-based artist Eleanor Anton called Carving, a Traditional Sculpture from 1972. It's a work that takes on the subject of the female nude, and we've talked a bit in this course about the different kinds of expectations and the different role in painting of the classical male nude and the female nude. Here, the female nude is Anton herself, and in this work she places herself on a crash diet for 37 days and photographs herself 4 times a day for each of those days, displays the work sequentially so that rather than an artist carving marble into the perfect image of the female form, Eleanor Anton literally carves her own body through dieting into a slimmer version of the feminine ideal according to the fashion magazines. So here we can see in this detail of the last 7 days in carving the ways in which the project of creating female form is turned from a highly aestheticized, virtuoso act of painting to an almost clinical exercise of documenting a regime that's literally imposed on the body. Another work in a similar mode, and it's perhaps a kind of canny response to Warhol's Sleep, is this work by the French artist Sophie Calle called The Sleepers from 1979. In this work, Calle sets up 23 different situations. She solicits 23 of her friends, neighbors, and other people that she talked into it, to coming to her bedroom and sleeping in her bed for 8 hours while she watches them. And she performs this exercise on one person after another, one willing subject after another. And on the one hand, one would think of sleep and being in proximity in someone's bed and in proximity to them while they're sleeping as being the most intimate of events. And on the other hand, we see again this almost clinical act of counting and displaying in place of a highly aestheticized experience of being able to look upon, you know, a body caught in slumber unawares. And I will challenge you to go out and find a good 18th or 19th century painting precisely on that subject. We would think that we would find an experience of intimacy in this work, and instead we find an experience very much similar to the mundane clinical duration of the Warhol film. These works set up a kind of canny tension between duration and affect, between the ability of art to sum up experience in an eloquent and artificed way, and the literalness of the act of making a work. And I want to end with one final example of an artist taking a project of duration to its logical or illogical conclusion. I want to end with the work of Roman Apolka. Apolka was a Polish artist who emigrated to France, and he set himself a potentially limitless project. That is to say, a project of conceiving of painting as an act of counting, and of counting from 0 to infinity. Apolka would have seemed to have hit upon the perfect solution to the artist's perennial problem, the problem of what comes next. Of course there would always be another painting, because there would always be another number. Numbers run on to infinity. But at the same time, of course, that project runs into a very immutable fact, the fact of human mortality. And the last number that Apolka paints is 5,607,249.